Hello everybody, this is Sean and welcome to my StewMac 2 Kings build video. I've done a few of these build videos now because I've built at least a dozen of these StewMac kits between the 2 Kings and the Ghost Drive, which is the clone. The 2 Kings boost, if you're not familiar, is StewMac's version of Analogman's King of Tone, which I believe is based off of 2 blues breakers, modified blues breaker circuit. That is a little bit adjustable. You can adjust the gain for low or high when you build it. That's a build option. And then there are dip switches that you can set it to clean boost, overdrive, or distortion. You definitely are in distortion area if you build it with the high gain setting. It's really more of a overdrive. I like doing it with just the stock build with the low gain. You'll notice there that I held up a yellow and red LED. I hate the blue and white LEDs that ship with these kits. I think they're way too bright, and they're really annoying on your pedal board, especially if you're in a dark environment. So I always swap those out for something that's much more tame. In this case, I'm just going with old school red and yellow LEDs that are probably older than some of you watching this. But anyway, back to the King of Tone. That's Blues Breaker Circuit modified. It's got a clean boost, overdrive, blah, blah, blah. Build it stock, which I believe is the overdrive into the boost. Anyway, everything's in the instructions on how to set that up, and it's totally configurable for how you want to do it. So if you've never built one of these kits before, as long as the instructions are really good, and as long as you follow the instructions and prepare yourself and don't rush, that's probably the biggest key that I would say is just don't rush. Then you're probably going to have a successful build. Having some nice tools doesn't hurt. You'll notice I've got some very small needle nose pliers and a really good set of cutters there. That's an old set of Kleins that I've had since probably the late 80s, early 90s, and they still work fantastic. Are they cheap? No, but those $4 ones you got at Harbor Freight, you're not going to have in 30 years, I promise, and I guarantee you they don't work as well as these still do. So get some good tools if you're going to work on electronics. You'll notice up in the top right-hand corner that little blue thing, that's called a lead bender. That helps you bend the leads to put so that they go through the circuit board, printed circuit board easily. Those are only a couple bucks, and if you're going to do this a lot, they're definitely worth it. If you're not only going to do one pedal, you can probably get away with just bending leads with your pliers or by hand. But if you're going to do more than one, definitely get one of those. Okay, so read the instructions, get all your parts sorted, make sure you know what all the parts are. So sort them out, get all your resistors together, all your diodes together, all your capacitors together, all the switches together, etc. And then what I do is I measure every single component. So you can see here I'm measuring resistors and labeling them. And this is a double check because then you can go back and make sure that the values you wrote down match the values in the list, and the quantities that you have match the quantities in the list, the parts list. Again, having built over a dozen of these, I've had a couple kits that came with a couple extra parts. I got 2 when you only needed 1. And I had one kit that actually was missing a couple potentiometers. I will say that StewMac, if you're not aware of StewMac, they have top-notch customer service. It's excellent. As soon as I sent them an email, the next day I had those parts on the way. So they're fantastic. If the situation does arise where you need a couple parts, they will take care of you. Service is excellent. But sorting like this and measuring does so many things, because not only do you make sure that you have all the parts that you need for your build, it's going to save you untold hours of problems later if you build it correctly to begin with, because taking this thing back apart and trying to figure out what's wrong with it, I would say unless you're really versed in electronics, it's just not something the average person is going to be able to do. It's either going to work or it's not, and if it doesn't work, then you're out your money, right? So and I'm not trying to scare anybody off. These kits are not that intimidating, and they're definitely worthwhile, and they are fun. Just be organized. Take your time. Okay, so again, I measure all my parts, make sure I have them. Then when I'm going through the instructions, do them in order. I do not skip around, and I mark every single one off as I do it, so I can't lose my place, and I know exactly what's been done and where I'm at. And if, for say, you have 6 of one component, like 6 resistors of one certain value, you don't have to put all 6 through the board at the exact same time. You can actually do a couple, solder them, trim them, do the next 2, solder, trim, then the last 2, etc. You don't want to have so many leads sticking up through the board that it makes it hard to actually go in and solder them. So just do a couple at a time. Make sure you get them in the right location. That's kind of important, right? If you put the parts in the wrong location, it's definitely not going to work. So one of the things here that a lot of people don't realize that aren't into electronics already is you start with the shortest, aka smallest, shortest components first. That way, when you flip the board over, your work surface, your desk or mat, whatever it is that you're building on, is actually pushing those components up to the board and keeps them a nice flush fit. And then as you progress to the taller items, you know, when you flip it over, you're still getting the work surface pushing those up and keeping a nice connection with the circuit board. So that's why you start with the diodes and resistors first, and then work your way up to the chips and the electrolytic capacitors and whatnot. You definitely want to use a nice soldering iron. You don't want to use your dad's old plumbing one or one he had for doing electric work. You definitely don't want to use one of the ones that's a gun. That's, you know, complete overkill and ridiculous for this type of work. You want one that has a very small fine point tip, as well as the solder that you have. You want to get some really high quality solder. And it, again, you can see it's a very, very fine, thin solder that I'm using here. Typical solder like you would have bought at Radio Shack 30 years ago is probably at least double the size of this, because boards and everything were bigger back then. You would use something like that for working on tube electronics, etc. But it's not really appropriate here. You want something very fine and thin. And in the case of what I'm using, I'm actually using lead-based solder. They make both, or maybe they don't make lead anymore because lead's banned. In manufacturing, you can't use lead-based solder anymore, but I think it's the best solder and lasts the longest. I have a stockpile of it, and I use it on everything I build. You can use whatever you want. Just because it's lead, it's not going to kill you. Just don't eat it. You know, just be mindful of what you're working with. But it's not dangerous by any stretch, as long as you, again, aren't doing anything crazy with it. Yep. Again, you'll notice, pause, inspect your work, make sure. You'll notice I have a jeweler's loop there, eyepiece, whatever you want to call it. And I go in and make sure that all of the solder joints are good. They haven't leaked or, you know, run over to a pad beside where they're supposed to be and caused a short. That would cause you a nightmare later. So again, take your time, work slowly, inspect your work when you're done, make sure it looks good. Yep. And as you'll notice, just like I did with the resistors, I put the capacitors over on the sheet and wrote down the values as I was putting them in. So taking a little extra time right now up front. Well, like I said, if you have a problem, if you have something in the wrong place, you have a short, something like that, it's going to take you 10 times longer to go back and figure out what's wrong as it would be to just get it right to begin with. And I would say for some of you out there watching this, if you don't have a lot of electronics experience, you may not be able to fix it at all because you may not understand what's wrong or how to troubleshoot it. So again, take your time, invest a little bit of, invest that time up front so you don't have to spend hours later, or worse yet, just end up with a pedal that you can't use. That's definitely not what we want. And again, not trying to scare anybody off. If you haven't built one of these before and you're thinking about it, as long as you go into it with the mindset of being prepared and taking your time, they're a lot of fun. They sound really, really, really good when they're built. So it's a worthwhile, fun project. And obviously I've done a bunch of these, and I do them, make build videos for the internet. A bunch of my friends have asked me to build these for them since I have an electronics background. I'm an engineer by trade, so I've been building electronics since the 80s. But anybody can do it as long as you read the instructions, which are excellent, and follow these tips here. Just take your time, be organized, be thorough, inspect your work as you go, and don't rush. And if you get tired or whatever, just get up, take a break, come back and work on it tomorrow. You don't have to build the whole thing at one time. I'd say a typical build time for one of these, depending on your experience level, is going to be anywhere from 1 to 3 hours. I mean, if you're an expert and really understand what you're doing, you could probably do one in an hour. I would say typical time is probably going to be a couple hours. And if you really, really are unfamiliar with it and are just really taking your time, you probably get it done in 3. Shouldn't take you longer than that, I wouldn't imagine. You'll see here I'm measuring the wire. That's going to be for the in and out connections and connect the 2 PC boards together. And just like the pliers and the cutters, wire strippers, they make a lot of cheap ones. That's a pair of clients too. So get some good ones, and if you use them a lot, you will definitely thank yourself for spending the extra money. Plus, if I'm not mistaken, I think both of those are made in the US still, or at least those ones that are there. So do this a little different from the instructions. They say put a piece of tape on it and all that. I think it's easier just to do 1 or 2 at a time and solder them. Just let the weight of the board, when it's flipped over, hold it in place. If you try to do all 9, even with a piece of tape, that's a little unwieldy. You'll notice here I do the same thing. I get a couple through the board, solder them, put another couple through the board, and then solder them. Trying to get all, I think there's 9 there, done at one time. You may get lucky and do it, but I think it's too much. I do a couple at a time, put the next couple in, then solder them. Now this is an important part once you get this done, because they're so close together and it's so important connecting those boards together. You definitely want to go back and inspect that, make sure that you don't have any shorts and that you have good solder connections on them, so that they won't pull loose or anything like that as you're putting the actual PC boards into the case with the potentiometers and the switches. So now we're doing the other wires, which are for the power jack and in and out jack. Okay, here's looks like we're getting ready to put in the potentiometers. You have to trim off the little tabs if the potentiometers you have them. These did, so you can see I just cut those off. They come off really easily with your cutters, so that's not a big problem. All the potentiometers are different. So you have 2 of each type. There's 3 types because there's 2 pedals in one enclosure. There's 3 potentiometers, 2 of each type is 6. So make sure you have the right ones sorted to put them in the right order, which is clearly in the instructions there. You may not be able to view it on the YouTube video, but they are labeled really well. Now, one thing you don't necessarily have to do is bolt them to the chassis, like StewMac says in the instructions there. I think just inserting them into the pedal enclosure is good enough to get it lined up and get started. So you notice I kind of skipped that step, and you can see they're loose and free to move around or whatnot. So get them all done up, and then you'll notice I only did a couple of them. I didn't solder every single tab. I just did one on each just to hold them in place. Just want to make sure to get it to where they won't fall out, but I'm not wanting to solder them all the way down yet. Well, I guess I go back and do it now once they're there. Other option is to just wait until you have it in the enclosure and then go back and finalize them up. You can do it either way. You'll notice I had the enclosure painted. I always do that a week or two prior. Let the paint set up so that it's good and hard so that you don't scratch or tear up your paint job when you're putting the pedal together. That would be the first thing I do. Get your pedal kit, paint the enclosure however you want it, and then let it sit for a couple weeks. Again, let that paint get nice and hard so you don't tear it up, scratch it up. So earlier in the video, I kind of missed it, but there's a point where I hold up red and yellow LED for a second. These kits from StewMac ship with white or blue or both LEDs. And the white and blue LEDs, if you're not familiar, are super bright. They're obnoxiously bright, I believe. I don't like them. They're very, very bright, especially if you're in a darkened environment with your pedal board. I mean, it's like having a flashlight in your face. I always replace them. So I use some old school LEDs I had. It's a red and yellow one. Probably older than some of you watching this video even. Had forever. So those are some old school LEDs, but I mean, any modern LED is going to be the same. The red and yellow and green, orange, those are not as high output. The blue and white, because of the chemistry and the way they're made, they're typically much, much brighter, which for just, you know, a little light on the pedal, especially that when you use it in a darkened environment a lot, is not a good combination. I don't understand why people put white or blue LEDs on their pedals. One pedal I use all the time is one of the new PRS ones, their compressor, the Mary, Wind Cries Mary, whatever they call it. But it's got white LEDs and it drives me crazy. I have tape over them because they're too bright. So don't build your pedal with the white or blue LEDs. Swap them out. You'll thank me later. Again, just take your time. Read the instructions as many times as you need to have a clear understanding of what to do. One thing I'll point out here, this is a good time to mention, you'll notice that one has a battery snap. You can order the kit where it's 9 volts only or with the battery, but they're the exact same price, so why not get the one with the battery clip? Then you can use it with a battery or with a power supply. Either one, it doesn't matter. You have the choice. If you get the one that doesn't have the battery clip, you can never ever run it with a battery. It just doesn't make sense. It's the exact same cost. Build the one with the battery clip. I don't even know why they offer two. It doesn't make sense. I will probably never in my life run this with a battery, but it makes sense to have the battery clip if it's an option. It's the same price. And who knows, somebody down the line may think they sound better with an old battery, because that is the internet rumor, right? And that's how John Mayer recorded all his records, was with a battery. So build the version with the battery clip. Okay, we're almost to the point there. Yeah, you can see you have the presence roll-off adjustment there. I set mine to stock. You'll notice I cut out the little grid there and I glue it on the inside of the pedal, so you can have that reference whenever you pop it open what the dip switches do. This is not part of the instructions, but it's again something I would recommend doing. That way, again, you pop the bottom off, you have everything you need to adjust it and switch between boost, the clean boost, overdrive, or distortion. Everything's just right there. Okay, so buttoning that up and then adjusting and putting on all the knobs. And we're getting awfully close. And you'll see we have a completed pedal and it all works. Good luck building yours.